The ayes to the right, 323. The noes to the left, 302. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
It's been a day and night of protest and confrontation as thousands of protesters clashed with police officers, while inside the House of Commons the government won the day on tuition fees. And tonight, even the car carrying Prince Charles and Camilla was attacked by demonstrators.
Prince Charles was driving past, right? All I saw, a couple of people were kicking the door. He got terrified, he drove on, police came down and everyone just...
We'll ask the government, did the authorities underestimate the scale of the protests? We'll also hear from the architect of the plan to make students pay more. Here in the studio, the Universities Minister faces students. It's been an extraordinary day and night on the streets of London.
I've been on the streets today with people who are very young and intensely angry, so it doesn't look like this will be the last battle.
We're from the slums of London, yeah? How do they expect us to pay 9,000 for uni fees?
You get me?
And EMA was the only thing keeping us in college. What's stopping us from doing drug deals on the streets anymore? Nothing.
And we're live at a student occupation at the London School of Economics. Also tonight, what is the future for university education?
That statue is called knowledge, and like a university education, it's not always apparent just what it's for.
The Universities Minister will debate with a trio of academics: David Starkey, Tristram Hunt and Sarah Churchwell. Good evening. The day began with peaceful protests over tuition fees and descended into the kind of sustained violence and trouble rarely seen in Britain. Protesters injured, others arrested, police officers attacked, several of them seriously hurt, government buildings vandalised. And tonight the heir to the throne was caught up in the violence when Prince Charles and Camilla's car was attacked in central London, daubed in paint and a window cracked. We'll get reaction to tonight's scenes in a moment from David Willits. Inside Parliament this afternoon, the MPs debated the controversial increase in tuition fees to up to £9,000 a year in England. In Scotland, the Education Secretary has ruled out tuition fees altogether. And when it came to the Westminster vote, the revolt by Liberal Democrats meant the measure passed by just 21 votes. Michael Crick followed today's extraordinary events. His report contains flash photography.
Tonight, substantial parts of central London have frankly been out of control, with some of the most serious attacks on organs of the British state since the war. Around Parliament Square this evening, hundreds of students and other protesters attacked Her Majesty's Treasury, where they scrawled graffiti, smashed windows and broke inside. Only riot police stopped a full-scale invasion of the building. The Supreme Court nearby was also a target. Also under siege, the heir to the throne, Prince Charles. In Oxford Street, mobile phone footage captures the moment as protesters attacked the car carrying Charles and Camilla to a royal variety performance. Oh my God! The couple looked terrified, and stills taken afterwards show how one of the windows was smashed and the car hit with paint.
Prince Charles was driving past, right? All I saw, a couple of people were kicking the door. He got terrified, he drove on, police came down and everyone just...
Did you see them do the graffiti?
I didn't see them do the graffiti, I didn't see you smash the window, but I saw Prince Charles and his car get attacked.
We have seen on the streets of London today the appalling levels of violence that we have seen. This has nothing to do with peaceful protest. Attacks on peace officers and property show that some of the protesters had no respect for Londoners, for London or for its citizens. And I think the police have done a tough job today in exceptionally difficult circumstances. We thank them for their professionalism because they've put themselves on the line to keep London's streets and citizens safe. Peaceful protest is acceptable. Violent protest and criminal damage are not.
Trouble in central London began brewing this morning, even before the Commons debate started, as mounted police tried, without success, to stop protesters from gathering outside the House of Commons. Inside, the Lib Dem Business Secretary Vince Cable must also have felt almost as beleaguered as he struggled against Labour heckles and interventions to make his case for raising the cap on tuition fees to £9,000 a year.
We could have made a decision to drastically cut the number of university students. We could have cut student maintenance. We could have cut the funding to universities without replacing it. But instead, we have opted for a set of policies that provides a strong base for university funding, which makes a major contribution to reducing the deficit and introducing a significantly more progressive system of graduate payments than we inherited. And I'm proud to put forward that measure to this House.
For Labour, John Denham, who rebelled over Iraq, encouraged coalition MPs now to follow his example.
I do know what you're going through. It is very hard to stand aside from friends and colleagues with whom you've shared many a battle. But I'll say this, after you've done it, you realise it wasn't half as bad as you thought it would be before you did it. The self-respect you gain far outweighs any temporary loss of position, power or income. And the truth is that in any generous political party, and mine is not the only generous political party in this House, there is usually a way back. Mr. Speaker, this decision matters so much to so many people. I'd say to the House, if you don't believe in it, vote against it.
As the protests and the mayhem grew outside, MPs inside couldn't hear them, couldn't see them, barely mention them. And their debate was peppered by regular interventions from Tory and Lib Dem rebels.
It isn't too late. There needs to be a rethink. There needs to be a proper review of how we can come up with the best system for higher education and indeed all post-18 education in this country.
But I urge the government just to look again, to think again, and to come back to this issue next year, 6 months' time, when we can have had a proper conversation, because we only get to do this once. And if we cede the principle of £9,000 tuition fees, I'm deeply concerned about the message that sends out.
After 5 hours of sometimes passionate exchanges, they voted.
The ayes to the right, 323. The noes to the left, 302.
A coalition majority of 21, exactly a quarter of what it should be, indicating significant numbers of rebels in both governing parties. 28 Liberal Democrat MPs voted with the government, 21 against and 5 abstained. So around half of all Lib Dem MPs backed the leadership. Meanwhile, 6 Conservatives voted against the government and 2 abstained. And as a result of all this, 3 PPS's, parliamentary aides, had to resign their posts after defying the whips. Jenny Willett and Mike Crockett for the Liberal Democrats, and Lee Scott, a Conservative. So, in the end, as expected, the government won today's vote with reasonable comfort. And tuition fees are probably the most difficult issue on the coalition's immediate agenda. But government business managers will be aware that very nearly 10% of the coalition's MPs today failed to support the government. And the thing about rebelling in Parliament is that it can become something of a habit. But votes in Parliament may not deter violent protests or quell public anger. Parliament Square has been cleared tonight for now. But many demonstrators are inspired by what happened with the poll tax 20 years ago. That too was agreed by MPs, but ministers eventually ditched it after violent street battles and deep public hostility.
Michael Crick, well, we've just had the latest update on injuries after the disturbances. 43 protesters attended hospital, with 36 being taken there by the London Ambulance Service. And 12 officers have been injured, with 6 requiring hospital treatment. Well, we're joined now by the University's Minister, David Willetts, where we're going to go through the fee issue later on. But first of all, let's just deal with the protests. The Metropolitan Police must have had warnings, really, from the scenes that they'd had at Millbank Tower. Do you think they were prepared for this?
I saw with my own eyes the Metropolitan Police preparing, and we did know that these protests were due. Sadly, it looks as if they were violent, in some cases very violent, and I think people will be very shocked by what they've seen. And I think the police did an incredibly professional job in very difficult circumstances, and I think many of the students who came wanted to protest peacefully, and it's such a tragedy that a small number of violent protesters can really sort of completely spoil what should have been an opportunity for Parliament to debate things and people to express their views peacefully.
What do you make of Michael Crick's point is that there's echoes of the poll tax?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that we're in that same situation at all. I mean, we're talking about something here that is a specific reform proposal, and I don't actually think that these protests, I think they're not something that can be sustained, because I don't believe that the underlying grievances are anything like the same.
So therefore you don't believe that protests can alter the politicians' minds as it did in the poll tax?
Well, I think politicians in a democracy always have to debate and engage, but what's gone wrong today is that we've had these shocking violent protests by people who are not willing to participate in the normal democratic process.
And one thing that we certainly weren't expecting was that the car carrying Prince Charles and Camilla would be attacked in Regent Street. Now, what do you make of what happened? Because apparently the Royal Protection Officers were separated from the car in all directions, and really the heir to the throne was left alone.
Yeah, I think one should be very careful of commenting on operational police matters. The police have an incredibly difficult job to do across London on a day like this, when we know that the protests often break up into different groups, small violent groups that move around.
Yes, but he was taken, to be honest though, he was taken right into the heart of the demonstration. I mean, do you think there possibly should be an inquiry about that?
I don't think it's right for me, a politician who is in the House of Commons and have seen the work that the police do. I'm not going to sit here and make any criticisms of the police. What I will say is that the police I saw were being incredibly resilient and displaying extraordinary courage in an incredibly difficult situation where sadly some protesters were clearly behaving with extreme violence.
For the moment, David Willetts, thank you very much indeed. Well, the thousands of protesters who converged on the capital today all had their own reasons for being there, be they university students, school pupils, parents, academics or agitators. Paul Mason spent the day with some of the protesters.
At the UCL occupation, they began the day knowing it would be decisive. But after 22 days here, they're already thinking about bigger things than a vote in Parliament.
I think it's really showed all the people that if you are against what government is doing and you're organised and you're unified and you're public, then actually government does listen to you. And I think that message has been so strong that other people will follow it, and there really is this sense of sort of a big society forming, but I mean very contrary to the one that Cameron sort of envisaged us being part of. But I mean, is this like big society backlash, and you can see it just increasing, and I think the student movement is sort of at the forefront of that.
If it's about anybody, this movement is about people like Chris, a school student who just turned up from Lincoln on his own.
I like to see myself as independent and free, and for me, being in debt is not being able to be free and being able to make choices. It is a real, do I go to university or not? Am I going to be able to get a job at the end of this? All this kind of things.
You might not go.
I might not go, that is the honest truth. I'm looking at different ways of, and they're not, I really do want to go to university, but I come from a not great, not brilliantly well-off background, and so it's quite difficult. My parents can't support me. We're sort of lower middle class.
By lunchtime, upwards of 20,000 people like him were marching through the streets of London. The official leaders of the NUS could not bring themselves to take part. The seasoned politicos, though, think they've already changed the whole game of politics under the coalition.
What has really changed here is there's a sense you can resist. That's what's changed. After the 80s, people felt because there's no alternative, you can't resist the government. There's no means of defeating them because there wasn't an alternative to what was happening, to that whole market agenda. That's what's changed. People think it is possible.
The school students are setting the tone of this march, I think. I mean, I think they're almost the driving force.
You get a feeling that the undergrads are kind of deferring slightly to...
There's a lot of... We are deferring to them in a way. In a way, they're almost the kind of leadership of this in a way. Because they're the ones who are immediately being impacted. They'll be the ones paying the higher fees. They're the ones who are panicking about the impact of huge amounts of debt if they were to have a university education.
When the march reached Parliament, it hit a dead end. Nobody knew where it should go.
It's 2 o'clock and the front of the march has reached Parliament Square and there's nowhere for it to go other than into the police lines, which is just done.
This was where the police began to lose control. With the fences down, soon there were skirmishes yards from Parliament. But the majority did not want to skirmish. They wanted to dance, above all, the very youngest. This is the unlikely force that blew a hole in the coalition, and the first time many of them will get to vote will be at the next general election. When students tried to break away from Parliament, it began a running battle which lasted long into the night. Mounted police charged repeatedly into the crowd. Protesters attacked, threw paint, fireworks and some heavy objects. At times the crowd overwhelmed the police and they used their batons freely. The police too suffered numerous casualties. Through it all, a sense of a break with what student protest has meant in the past.
We're from the slums of London, yeah? How do they expect us to pay 9,000 for uni fees? You get me? And EMA with the only thing keeping us in college, what's stopping us from doing drug deals on the streets anymore? Nothing.
As the day draws to a close, it augurs quite badly for the coalition government, because the people who've been fighting here on the streets, with their faces uncovered, in full view of the CCTV cameras, have by and large been ordinary young British people, and they just hate what they're going to have to pay for their education.
The streets around Whitehall have seen clashes before, and student movements, but never before has a government majority teetered under the pressure of a movement of sixth formers and to the sound of dubstep.
Paul Mason, well, the architect of the rise in tuition fees is the Liberal Democrat Business Secretary Vince Cable. I spoke to him earlier. Vince Cable, now people really know that the Liberal Democrats can't be trusted.
No, that's not correct at all. We had a coalition agreement. We're implementing that coalition agreement. We knew that it wasn't going to be possible to deliver the pre-election commitments on tuition fees, but we had a challenge which we responded to, which was to enact policies which contribute to reducing this massive government deficit while finding other ways of providing funding for universities to keep up world-class standards and to change the system we inherited for Labour of graduate contributions to make it more progressive, more related to people's ability to pay. And we've done those things, and in very difficult circumstances, I think have delivered a better policy.
So yesterday, Nick Clegg seemed to suggest that this was a compromise born out of the need to actually work with the coalition. You seem to be saying this is actually the best policy possible. Which is it?
Well, in an ideal world, we would be spending lots of money and I would be Father Christmas and everything would be free. We're not in an ideal world. We're in a very, very tough financial environment in which, in universities, as in other bits of the economy, very difficult, painful cuts are having to be made.
So, but let's be quite clear. Let's be quite clear. Before the election, Liberal Democrat MPs signed the NUS pledge to vote against tuition fees. Now, was that because you believed in it, or was it because you thought you would never get into power and therefore you were never going to have to actually stick to your principles?
Well, there was a party policy on tuition fees and getting rid of tuition fees that we all signed up to.
Did you agree with it? Did you agree with it?
That was party policy, and when we joined the coalition government...
Did you agree with it or not, Vince Cable?
I supported my party's policy.
But did you agree with getting rid of tuition fees or not?
I supported my party's policies, but when we entered the coalition, we had to make compromises, and we did make compromises. The Tories had to drop some of their favourite policies. We had to compromise on others. We knew that the tuition fee issue was going to be a very difficult one, but we agreed that we would try to make the system better and fairer, and that's what we've done in the context which I've inherited as a departmental minister of having to make very painful cuts. And that's the issue I'm focused on, not on what happened 9 months ago. We're in government, we're having to make tough choices.
Yes, but I would put it to you that it's kind of inconvenient to remember, but the problem is that the Liberal Democrat backbenchers remember. And isn't it interesting that the Liberal Democrats that have positions in power, except for 2 PPSs, voted for the policy. The Liberal Democrats who are not in power voted against. It's the biggest ever rebellion in the Liberal Democrats since it was formed, and you couldn't carry your party with you.
No, we didn't collie all the party with us. We did have, as you say, a substantial number of my colleagues voted against it. We knew when we went into government that this was probably going to be one of the most difficult challenges we'd have to face. My job as the Secretary of State, I inherited a system based on tuition fees that were almost certainly going to rise substantially. The last Labour government was fully committed to making very deep cuts in my department concerned with universities. Tuition fees were going to rise under the Brown report. My job was to try to make the system fairer, better, and that's what I've been working on with my colleagues for the last 6 months. But Vince Cable, you haven't been able... No.
If you can't convince your own backbenchers, how are you going to convince the country? And if you can't see them, you can certainly hear the noise outside. People see this as a betrayal of principle at the first hurdle. The Liberal Democrats have failed at the first test of principle.
No, we haven't failed at all. The first test we had was joining the coalition. And it was a difficult test because we entered into government. If you may remember the context, the country needed stable government. There was a financial emergency. The country wanted parties to work together in the national interest. And the first big test we made was entering into that coalition, accepting compromises on things that we believed in and were very committed to, and the tuition fee policy.
But this is the first evidence of the impact of that. And surely the evidence is the Liberal Democrats, it's 2 parties now. It's the guys in power and it's the guys on the backbenches, and you're split now, and the split will continue.
No, that is not correct. I think actually we'll be significantly stronger having been through this very difficult process. We've met together several times in the last few days to debate with each other how we should deal with this. People have strong views, but we are still colleagues. We're going to work together as a team. There is no permanent division. We're going to put this behind us.
You've got your fingers crossed. You've got your fingers crossed on that.
But I'll tell you, all my colleagues are now fully committed to the coalition government, including those who voted against it.
Right. Well, can I ask you one final question? Because this is what has been exercising many Liberal Democrats. The assertion that this will actually be good for poor students, because poor students in poor families are debt averse, and what you are essentially doing is condemning them to decades of debt, and that will put a lot of them off going to university.
No, I think that is absolutely wrong, and I think it will be proved to be wrong. We've built into this policy a whole series of commitments which mean that that will not happen. First of all, low-income graduates will not pay any contributions. We've lifted the threshold to 21,000. If people graduate, they're in low income, they take time off to have a family, if they're unemployed, they don't pay.
With this hanging over their head.
It is a more progressive system. Large numbers of people will not have to pay the full contribution. Roughly half will not have to pay because it's linked to people's ability to pay. This is not debt in a commercial sense. The student loan scheme is not a commercial scheme. People who want to borrow mortgages, for example, are not affected by it in any way. And we're also helping people from low-income families in other ways. The scholarship scheme will help with that. We've increased the availability of grants for people when they're studying at university. The system is made considerably more progressive than it was, and that was acknowledged by the Institute of Fiscal Studies this morning.
Vince Cable, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So after today's vote and trouble, what happens now to the student movement? Matt Prodger is with some protesters at the London School of Economics. Matt.
Yes, Kirsty, the LSE is, of course, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, a cradle of learning for generations of leaders. And as you can see from the poster there, under occupation at the moment. Now, all evening, people have been coming back from the protest, the students filing through here, through the entrance of the university. And up here on the right is where they have been occupying for the past week one of the rooms here. It hasn't disrupted studies here because a large proportion of the students here are foreign students who are largely unaffected by this whole debate. But the British students have occupied this room here. As you can see here, just here in this ante-room is where they've been preparing their signs, their placards. And in here now, they've been glued to the TV coverage tonight, seeing how it's gone down, and we've gathered a group of them here to see how they feel about how the protest has gone. Now, I'm going to speak first of all to Sasha Salmon here, one of the organisers. Sasha, let me ask you first of all, how do you feel about a protest that began as a peaceful protest against tuition fees, ending up in the news headlines that you're watching tonight with attacks on shops in Oxford Street, an attack on Charles and Camilla in their car, police being injured? How do you feel about it?
Well, we all went there peacefully, but I think it's been completely underreported how violent the police were. We were kettled. I didn't go for a wee. I didn't have a glass of water. I didn't eat anything from 12 o'clock till 6 o'clock. And the only reason I got out at 6 o'clock is I faked a panic attack. So realistically, it's not student violence. It's a reaction to the fact that we were stuck. I don't know how that's lawful that we were stuck there for so long. There was kids there, there were parents there, there were tourists who accidentally were in
Did you see people attacking the police at all?
I mean, these missiles we hear about, I saw an egg, I saw a stick, I saw people not moving when they were being pushed. Yeah, I mean, of course, people retaliated. They're angry. This is our futures. My brothers aren't going to be able to go to university, and that's a tragedy. So I'm out there protesting for them. It's a passionate issue. So people are passionate, and people might have been a bit rough, but it's nothing like we're not terrorists. We're not. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, the police, of course, can contest that account. Mm-hmm. Sherelle, do you feel the protest today was a success? I mean, the vote went through regardless.
I think it was a success in the fact that we kept the visual opposition up and we showed them, even after the vote went through, we're still going to be there, we're still going to protest, we're still going to show that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that these cuts are opposed as much as possible. And I think,
So what now? I mean, is this occupation of this part of the university, is this over now?
No. No way.
No. So what do you do? What do you do now?
We keep on, where our demands are aimed at our Vice-Chancellor to write a joint statement with us and the Student Union and the UCU. So until he does that, we won't be moving anywhere.
So you're not moving anywhere?
Nope.
Okay, that's it here from the LSE. These students are going to be bedding down here tonight. There's a group here from Sheffield as well. And as they say, they're going nowhere. Back to you, Kirsty.
Thank you, Matt. Well, with the University's Minister now, David Willits, we're joined by Mo Saqib from the University of Manchester, Rahul Mansanini from Cambridge, and Hero Austin, also from London School of Economics. Before I come to you, just picking up on what both Sasha and Zarela said there. First of all, she knows her brothers won't go to university, and Sharella is saying, and we're going to carry on.
Well, I was shocked when she said that she knew her brothers wouldn't go to university, because there's been several references during the programme to paying the fees. Of course, they're not going to pay the fees. The taxpayer is going to provide the money for students, of course, then to pass the funds on to the university. No family's going to have to reach into their back pocket to pay for their child to go to university. When and if they graduate and in well-paid jobs, at that point they start making a contribution if they're earning more than £21,000 a year. And I don't think that should deter, and I very much hope it doesn't deter her brother from going to university.
Well, Rahul, what is your point for the University's Minister?
I think that's exactly the point. People will be deterred from going to university because of the perception, because of the problem of a £9,000 a year headline fee. One of your own MPs, Dr. Lewis, today was saying that the question is about whether people perceive it as fair. And it is quite clear from the protests, from the petitions, that they don't.
But the 9,000 is for tuition, but you've also got to find your living. And so
absolutely. So you'll end up with debts of 50,000 by the time you leave university, possibly.
And how do you feel about debt?
I have a problem with it. It makes me feel like I don't have the freedom to go on and do what I want to do. And it remains true that those from the poorest backgrounds tend to be the most debt averse.
Mo, put your question directly to the Minister, please.
Well, I guess what I want to say to David is, if you look at a 3-year course at a Russell Group University, a student on that course can now expect to graduate with up to £40,000 worth of debt. I don't call that progressive. Now, you might argue that after 30 years you'll wipe off that debt. Being in debt for 30 years is not progressive. But I guess what I want to know from you, David, is you said yourself a short while ago, a few months ago, that universities had not made the case for being able to charge higher fees. Now, the fact is, as fees have gone up over the last decade, the quality of our education has not gone up. We are now seeing a bonfire of humanities subjects, contact hours being cut. So are you telling me that with the trebling of fees, the quality of our education will also treble?
Well, I think you've actually put your finger on one of the key challenges and part of the thinking behind our proposals. I do think there is an issue about universities providing a high-quality teaching experience. I don't think they always do at the moment. In fact, I think what we've got at the moment is very strong incentives to focus on research, but there's large numbers of students who don't think that they get enough contact time with academics, who think the seminars are too crowded, who do think that that the big-name professor that's advertised on the prospectus doesn't seem to be around to teach them very much, and we do want to see that change. And I think these proposals, with the universities having to look to the students to bring the funds in, not the students' own money, looking to the students to bring their own funds in, will address precisely that thing, because I think you're putting your finger on what many people are very frustrated with at the moment.
You're not increasing funding, you're merely replacing state funding by pushing the cost onto the student. Funding is not being increased.
Well, it's not on the student. It is, I accept, a contribution from the graduate. It's not on the student. And you're right, our philosophy is that the money should come through the choices of the student. And I think what this is going to do, and you can hold me to account for this, what I want to see is universities looking out and thinking what exactly is the teaching experience we offer prospective students, and how can we make sure that that is world class so that students want to come to this university. That is the challenge for them after these reforms. They won't be able to get money from Quangos anymore, they'll only get it through the choices of students.
Okay, I'd just like to pick up on that point quickly, because I think it's kind of false. Like, universities like the LSE have relatively low standards of teaching compared to their comparative equals in the university sector, yet they have a ridiculous amount of applicants per place, and that's not going to change. So LSE knows that it doesn't really have to do that much about its teaching grant. It can rely on always having loads of students applying and keep its fees at high ground. So I think that's untrue. But I think one of my main questions is that students at LSE are angry that our teaching grant for social sciences looks to be cut by almost about 100%, with the cost being entirely transferred to the individual, and we're angry about that. And when we went out today and protested peacefully, I ended up being crushed under police barriers by police, and my friend who was completely peaceful is now in hospital with her collarbone broken. And I'd like to say we're angry about the social sciences being cut, and is by exercising our democratic right to peaceful protest, is it acceptable that we're being treated in this way?
And just before we go on, we must also point out that a number of officers were injured, and some seriously as well. Minister.
I mean, I do accept that sadly innocent people who wish to protest democratically have been caught up in violent protests, which I'm sure were a small proportion of the people overall demonstrating. First of all, on the teaching, and coming back to the teaching, I think actually you're a bit harsh on the LSE, and I think the director of the LSE himself would say that one of the things that he wants to do is focus more on the teaching experience. And also, and this is crucial, we are not against social sciences. These are changes that operate fairly across all disciplines. I'm not sitting in a government department, and nor is Vince Cable, trying to pick the subjects that students should do or trying to tilt the playing field against one discipline or in favour of another. What we believe in is well-informed choices by students.
Thank you all very much indeed, and we'll be coming to you in a minute, Minister. Today's rise in tuition fees and the cuts in direct funding to universities are likely to have a profound effect on universities in England, as we've just been hearing. How will the social intake, the courses chosen and the very culture on campus change? David Grossman reports.
There's a joke the boffins here at Queen Mary University of London rather enjoy. If an experiment is green and wriggles, goes a sign on the wall, it's biology. If it stinks, it's chemistry. And if it doesn't work, it's physics. What will be the outcome of the changes to higher education? Well, that is still very hard to calibrate. But academics here are clear on one thing: it is very much an experiment.
I'd have to be a godlike economist, psychologist, politician to know exactly what it's going to look like, because the government is so radically changing the rules that we won't know what it's going to look like probably until 4, 5, 6 years down the line.
Focusing simply on the rise in tuition fees can rather distort the wider picture of higher education funding.
So if the fees that students will be charged will potentially be treble, does that mean that places like this will now be awash with cash? Well, no, actually, because that extra income from students will be offset, sometimes more than offset, by a reduction in the amount of money that comes from general taxation.
At present, universities get paid by central government per student in 4 bands. The top band for courses like medicine and dentistry pays £14,500 per student per year. The lowest band for more classroom-based courses, typically arts and humanities, currently only gets £2,641 per student per year. But look at what the changes will mean. In the future, that top band, that's been cut to £10,794, while the bottom band, well, that goes to zero. The government will not be helping to fund those courses at all. When tuition fees were set at their current levels back in 2004, they were widely referred to as top-up fees. Now there is, in many cases, no government contribution to top up. Professor Simon Gaskell is the principal of Queen Mary University of London. He's concerned that there will be, in future, too much emphasis on earning and not enough on learning.
I think we should actually be asking the question, what is the fundamental purpose of higher education? And it's certainly to improve skills, it's certainly to improve individuals' employability, but there are actually wider functions than that. And the real risk in the current debate, in fact, is that we become too focused on university for skills, for increasing employability, for increasing income. It should also be about broader benefit to society, enriching society both with technical advances but also with cultural advances as well.
So how might this impact who comes to university and, crucially, which courses they choose?
Students at the moment are not only going to university to improve their employability in future years, they're going there to study a subject that they love and for their own personal development, both in academic terms and personal terms. However, if there will be a rise in tuition fees, the majority of students will now only be going to university to improve their future yield of income and improve their graduate prospects.
I am worried about the nature of this policy, which does seem to me like a rather huge gamble with a few hedged bets, if you like, in a progressive direction around the edges. A gamble which the government themselves can't be sure how it's going to turn out, and they are rather throwing onto us and onto the individual choices of students what the outcomes might be. We can plan for the various outcomes, we can conjecture, we can do market analysis, we can do plan budgets for the next few years. We're doing all of those things, but we do feel that this is an unnecessarily, or at least I feel that this is an unnecessarily large gamble.
Yeah, that's fine. It's taste.
The farmers' market at Queen Mary suggests a more business-like administration looking for ways of maximising revenue. And the students who chose this institution were, in a sense, shopping for an education, spending their own cash, or at least debt. A couple of decades ago, the student experience was the preserve of a tiny elite. Now it's part of the lives of almost half of young people. Some worry that the result of these current changes will be further moves towards commercialisation.
There is no problem with universities being more business-like, but they're not businesses. There are core values in universities which have existed for hundreds of years and will continue for hundreds of years to come. And those are to do with the generation of new knowledge, the creation of knowledge, and the dissemination of knowledge through multiple channels, one of which is teaching undergraduates and teaching graduate students and so on. So there's a risk in the current debate of forgetting those core values. That's what universities are fundamentally about.
One impact of the changes is that universities more and more have to offer better and better facilities to attract all those paying students. And Queen Mary has just opened a shiny new library with room for expansion. Some worry, though, that the real cost of these radical reforms might be measured in the books that won't now be written.
David Grossman. Well, now joining David Willits in the studio with me are the Labour MP Tristram Hunt, the historian David Starkey and the writer and academic Sarah Churchwell. Moving on now, just to talk, first of all, what a momentous day it was for education, David Starkey.
Well, indeed, I mean, for education, for the country. I mean, we've seen scenes that we haven't since the poll tax riots, and these are very different. In the poll tax riot, there wasn't a direct attack on the Treasury. The government buildings were not targeted in that fashion. This really, I think, the last time we've had this in central London is to go back to the Chartists. I mean, it's the last time that there have been scenes like that. But I think there's an enormously important difference. Many of the students were citing the poll tax. The great difference is most people don't care. The poll tax affected every family. Students do not. These are characteristically middle-class people on either side.
Let's move on to talk about the protest itself. Let's talk about what people were very eloquently talking about was the future of their own education and their brothers and sisters' education. And do you think fundamentally what universities have to offer and the way people are educated will change as a result of this?
Absolutely. I mean, today marks a very profound shift, and Parliament was given, I think, very little time to discuss this profound move which we're going to have because of the nature of the cuts, because of the nature of withdrawal of state funding for all sorts of subjects, the humanities being taken to task, social sciences, and as a result of that, the cost in total being laid upon the graduates. And David, in his wilderness years, wrote some interesting books and had some interesting thoughts about his generation, the baby boomer generation, effectively stealing all the money from the younger generations. We thought it was a critique. We now know it was a manifesto strategy. And what we've seen today, I think, is a remarkable assault on the ethos of the English university and the post-war settlement of education.
Look, can I just come back, Chris, on a couple of these points? First of all, the taxpayer funding is not being taken away, and that was, if I may say so, the problem in the presentation before as well. The taxpayers' funding will go via the student. It'll still come in, and then, as people graduate, when they're earning more than £21,000, they pay it back. But the public money will flow through, and the teaching grant is going to go through the hands of the students. There's no decision to take teaching a grant away from humanities and keep it for sciences, whatever. It's all going through the hands of the student. The only thing that remains is the grant for the extra fixed cost of delivering a science in a lab or something. This is not, and I know many people in the arts and humanities share Tristan's way, but this is not an attack on the arts and humanities. I think students will continue to choose to study those subjects, and quite rightly so.
Of course they'll continue to choose, they'll want to choose to study them. They're always still in great demand. The problem is that you're disincentivizing students taking the humanities at exactly the same time, because what you're doing is telling them what they need to do is to find jobs that will lead to higher employability, to be able to pay back their debts more quickly.
The logic is that they take low-paid jobs and then they don't have to pay anything
for 30 years. That would be the other.
Can we really address the fundamental question? The fundamental question, just one second. The really big issue is that you have taken a decision that, by transferring funding from a direct teaching grant to the universities to putting it via the student fee, what you have done is to say every university, to make up for that lost money, will have to charge either at the top or almost the top.
I don't accept the figure of 9,000 is what they're all going to charge.
Well, of course it is. Of course it is. We all know that they will.
Let's follow through. There is a huge evidence on my side and very little on yours. This seems to me to be a wholly irrational decision, in other words, to do this. Surely what you've been arguing for, what every sensible Tory, I don't know about these two, would argue for, is to stop using this word university as though there was one thing. Surely what we want
to make it a total market.
I would like to see a proper market. I would like to see a highly diverse university system. I'd like to see cheapo degrees lasting 2 years with fees of $3,000 a year, and I'd like to see proper Rolls Royces, like my university, Tristram's university.
Let's see
and mine, thanks very much.
Oh, rubbish, sorry. Cambridge isn't competing with UEA, really.
Let's see her finish the original point that she was going to make to David Willis.
Thank you very much, which is that the point of the universities in general, but particularly of the humanities, the public benefit of them is that they protect precisely the values that the market does not protect. And by saying that what is going to come and drive all of this will be student demand is, I think, precisely to shift away. It is first of all to presume that they know before they come to university what they should know and why they should know it. It presumes that they know how that will lead to employability. It presumes that they know that they've got it all mapped out at the age of 18 and that they do not go to university in a spirit of exploration and actually what we call learning.
Right. First of all, it doesn't. I think we've actually just seen an example of how much competition there already is between the universities, incidentally. But I have to say that a lot of people go to university in order to get a qualification. And there's a significant number of people who, because universities are now a whole range of different institutions, for a lot of people, going to university is a matter of getting a qualification which you need in order to secure a job. That is what you need to do in order to become a nurse or a teacher. That is not the only role of university. That's part of what they do. There are also people who go to university because they want to study the arts and humanities because they love them and they're worthwhile. And that can carry on. We will provide them with the funds to do that. We're not reaching a judgment that somehow that should be debarred from people.
Did you accept that you didn't know accept, or maybe you did. Do you accept that you didn't actually know exactly what you wanted to do at 18?
Of course, and you don't have to know that. There's absolutely no reason. What you do, I hope, want to know a bit more about than you get at the moment is exactly how many seminars will I be able to attend? Exactly how many essays will I be expected to write? Exactly. Those are how well equipped will the lab be? That's the kind of information that a lot of prospective
Can we just, before we go on
want.
to talk about the actual transaction between student and university, we pick up David Starkey's point. He talks about the cheapo degrees. With a certain degree, I would have thought of condescension there.
Yeah. I think you're right there, Kirsty. I detected
So,
it too.
but is there a danger that people who are worried about debt will opt for the shorter degree that will actually lead them down one single path rather than giving them a general education?
There are vicious circles all over the place.
There's a whole host of different things at university. I was at a fantastic university the other day in a part of the country which used to be very strong in the furniture industry. They've now got a school of furniture where what they do upholstery, they do the craft, they study the history of furniture design. That's the kind of thing the university can do. I very much expect that people who study that course will have stronger links with businesses. If they want to do those courses in 2 years rather than 3, there's much greater flexibility as a result of these reforms. That's all going to be part of the mix. And it's good that we have a mix. It's not a problem. It's a good thing.
We are being absolutely, unbelievably concentrating on Britain. You raise the point about how do we protect research? How do we protect the humanities? Look at America. The places where the best and the most interesting research is done is now America. The state has been an extraordinarily bad protector.
Excuse me, no, I'm sorry, you're incorrect about that.
I'm not.
We do not want the American model.
I do.
Well, I don't, and the Labour Party certainly doesn't. That we actually have in the British university system a very successful model. And why do we want to unpick this interrelationship between the state and I believe in tuition fees, so I believe in the contribution. And David, I think you're being naive if you don't think that university departments and vice-chancellors across the country are going to be looking at their humanities courses, are going to be looking at their social science courses, and are going to be withdrawing a great deal of it.
I think you're losing confidence in your own discipline. I think students will continue to choose those, and when they choose those subjects, then the funding will come from the whole wide range.
Very briefly, we just want to be very point. There will be a chance for that. 20 seconds for you.
But the other thing is that even if we bring in the American system, what you are not allowing for is the bursaries, the scholarships, all of the assistance that they have. And endowments, exactly.
And I tell you, this week we're launching a debate on precisely how we can strengthen endowments as well. That's also going to be part of the future.
Thank you all very much indeed. I wish we had another hour. Well, before the papers, the BBC has just managed to get hold of a new picture of the attack on Prince Charles and Camilla tonight, and you can see more on that on the news channel. But of course, it dominates the front pages after today's protest. The picture on the Times is again the shock on both the heir to the throne and Camilla's face, assault on the capital. Rioting protesters attack Charles and Camilla after a vote on tuition fees. Rioters attack Prince and car is the Telegraph. How could the police get it so wrong again is the bottom story in the front page of the Telegraph. On the Independent, there are just pictures of the protesters. And finally, on the Daily Mail, pure terror in her eyes. Charles and Camilla's car attacked by student fees mob. Well, that's all for tonight. Given that at least two of the Newsnight, Tim Hewell and Dan Kelly, have relatives who wrote early editions of Coronation Street, we thought we'd leave you with some scenes from the great soap 50 years ago on its 50th birthday. Good night.
There's one thing wrong with Coronation Street, of nasty sniffing clever dicks like you.
Oh, hell.
There's a train through the viaduct!
No, a bit on the slate's not a bad thing. If you didn't let some of them have it, they wouldn't spend nearly as much.
Growing up, do we?
He's dead.